everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw The Fall Guy open to around $28 million after being expected to make roughly $30 million, according to Tony over at Deadline, of course. And so that means ultimately the film not living up to at least the domestic opening that many had been projecting, even falling short of what Box Office Report has been, had been going into the weekend with as well. And so these are things, of course, that have to be considered with a film that ultimately is a very good time. I actually very much enjoyed the film. I thought the film was quite rad. If you want to see my full review of it, go check out my account over on Critic List, where I have a full typed review. Nothing too long there, but overall, again, very enjoyable. And I think a lot of people, most people who have been coming out of it, have been enjoying it quite a bit. Objectively, there's obviously issues that it has, but it is still a darn good time in a space where there really aren't a lot of really good comedies coming out these days. We are able to see, I think, Ryan Gosling continue to show that he is one of the few performers that can pretty much bring it in every single movie that he does. The fact that he is really the only good thing about the Barbie movie, for instance, is a great example of just that even if someone like me, who was very critical and really hated that movie, can still come out of it saying, yeah, but at least Ryan Gosling did as good of a job as he could with the character, and ultimately is the most memorable thing from that movie, which is hilarious, seeing the message of the actual film itself. I think that speaks, quite a lot as far as that is concerned. Speaks volumes, we could say, in that regard. And so we have Fall Guys numbers. We also have some updated numbers here for the second weekend of Challengers, which is a movie that I think just really showcases the depravity of modern Hollywood in so many different ways. And we have a bunch of other updates on some other films. Before we're going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, line up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video, a live stream goes live on the channel. So, of course, Tony. Good old Tony over at Deadline, as it says here, The Fall Guy stumbles to $28+ million opening. Now, again, it's always funny whenever Tony tries to, paint a film in a bad picture, because there's so many other films that have underperformed that he's given more positive headlines to. And so I think that this just goes to show you that he very much will pick and choose the kinds of movies that he wants to support. For instance, we all saw what he did last year when anytime he had to cover the film The Sound of Freedom, right? He always had to paint it as being some far-right conspiracy, QAnon garbage, right? Like that's the kind of nonsense that he went off on. And so it's very interesting to see that always on full display. And ultimately, The Fall Guy, though it did indeed come in under expectations, overall didn't come in nearly as much or as much underneath the expectations as I think that Stumbling would seem to indicate. You would typically think that would be a lot more than just, maybe $1 million or a couple $1 million. Now, I'm going to give you the first one to say that just because it did come in just slightly underneath expectations, that it still has a long way to go, because the expected budget, most people are saying around $130 million. Maybe some could be a range of like 120 to 150, but most saying 130. So it has a long way to go to reach profitability. But we are also going to still call out Tony when Tony does what Tony does. As it says right here, Universal's The Fall Guy isn't so strong and nobody is really shocked. Oh, really, Tony? I would love to have heard this when you had some of the other bigger releases from, say, the likes of Disney in their opening weekends that had terrible openings, and you were not nearly as forward or as harsh against them. It goes on, while it was projected to do at least $30 million and it's coming in at 28.5, this is the range for original action comedies, even when they star Ryan Gosling. Post-track exits report he's 50% of the reason why people want to see the movie. I totally understand why that is the case. 35% for Emily Blunt. The picture took in 25.4 from offshore markets, raising its foreign gross to 36.9 with a global at 65.4. I believe this was a movie that had an early release internationally, and so I think that is going to be something to consider when we do our projections going forward, because that does impact the numbers a little bit. But we'll continue to bring that up as we continue to go forward with its release. It goes on then to make comparisons between some of the other Ryan Gosling starring films, like movies like Barbie, for instance, which, as we all know, and even Tony will at least be honest enough to admit, was very much an anomaly. But also where that goes up against films like Blade Runner 2049, films like Edge of Tomorrow for the case of Emily Blunt's character. It goes on to say, so what gives? Why is The Fall Guy playing like a deflated balloon? Again, man, I wish he had this kind of commentary on some of the other releases, especially from last year. Even with a great A- cinema score and 90% positive on post-track. Maybe it is because of the fact that those numbers don't mean a darn thing. And Tony is still one of the very few, it seems, in mainstream media that's going to continue to try to go back to things like CinemaScore, a company that does not give you any data other than a score, with basically the mindset of trust us. Trust us with our score. Not to mention what is tracking, what CinemaScore is typically tracking is not what many people like Tony and other people online have to really say, all right, about the movie itself. It's more about what the marketing is for the movie itself. And so it's not even really genuine in that regard. Post-track giving a little bit more of an honest assessment of just in general what people think, right? Are they giving a positive review? Are they giving a negative review? And overall, again, most audiences are coming out of this thing enjoying it. Word of mouth is a very important thing, right? And it's not about what you get on CinemaScore or even what you get on post-track that's going to determine what your word of mouth is. It's just going to be simply the word of mouth itself. Something that's very difficult to track, right? Because you can try to use social media metrics, you can try to use metrics like these, but it's never going to be able to truly capture it, right? The only way you can ever tell something is happening is when it starts actually happening. I know, brilliant analysis here, but ultimately, yeah, you need to be able to actually have the numbers to back up what is being shown, right? So you can have these great data points, right? You can have these great things. It's just like with polling. Right, even in the political sense. The polls can say one thing, but that does not actually determine who shows up on the actual day of the vote itself and all the other myriad of other factors that can have an impact. And so the same also goes with general audiences, right? Showing up on the day to see an actual movie. All the other things that could also be going on in the world that could be keeping them from going to see a movie as well. And so even though this film has definitely had positive word of mouth from the people going to see it, I would argue that it's not nearly the same extent that we saw, for instance, for films like the likes of Dune, of which we saw a much bigger opening weekend. Again, I think that's also a major factor is how many people actually go to see your movie on your opening weekend, and that comes down to marketing. And whereas I thought Fall Guys marketing was very effective, clearly it missed the mark with a lot of people. Otherwise, it would have had a much bigger opening here in this way. Going into the actual projections from Box Office Report, since Box Office Pro has kind of really jumbled and dropped the ball in so many different ways, and so I've kind of decided to move on until they can fix those issues there. They had projections going into the weekend of the film getting around 29.5, so it seems to be similar to what we saw, again, from those industry standards. With Star Wars The Phantom Menace, which is a reissue, they actually have a giant R2-D2 popcorn bucket. I saw it in person when I went to go see The Fall Guy, and unfortunately, they were not selling it until Friday. So probably lost the chance to get that one, but hey, it's okay. $50 I do not need to be spending at all. It would just not even be for popcorn. It would be because Baby Thor would probably love it because he's a huge Star Wars fan. But The Phantom Menace, $11.5 million was what was projected for that film. Challengers was expected to get $8.4 million. And so let's see exactly how close these numbers are, since I've actually never used Box Office Report before. So Fall Guy got 28.5. Star Wars Episode 1 got 8 million. Challengers got 7.6. So overall, really not too far off, right? 8.4 is probably the biggest miss they had, right? They were projecting around a 44% drop for Challengers, and it ended up being about a 49%, so still not too far off. Very, very close for Star Wars The Phantom Menace and also for Fall Guy, right? Really not too much off there, but it is, I think, still indicative, right? Even though Fall Guy has won the weekend, right? Even though the Fall Guy is a very good time, and I think it's worth seeing. I think a lot of just regular everyday reviewers, in fact, have been praising the film as being a lot of fun. I still have to say, right, it is definitely longer than it should be. It is definitely nothing special that I would say is a must go out and see. I would recommend that people go out and see it in theaters, but it's not a must-see film. It's not a film that I think is one that you necessarily have to see. I think you could wait for it to come out on streaming and enjoy it, right? And I think that's going to be a factor when it comes to it, is that, yes, it's a good film, it's a fun film, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great film. And I think these numbers are kind of showcasing just that. But ultimately, when you have a film like Star Wars Episode 1, right, a prequel, and we all know that even though there's some prequel defenders out there that try to argue that they're good movies, objectively, they're not, right? Objectively, they have a lot of flaws to them, especially in their writing, especially in their dialogue. And yet, the fan base, the passion, especially for the memes surrounding the film, right, is enough to where even after, as we see the numbers.com reporting, right, the 1,300 weekends it's been since it was first released back in the late 90s, early 2000s, right, when the prequels were going on, is still very impressive, right, for it to be a top 2 film. But as impressive it is for Star Wars, it is also a bit of the sign of just how bad the box office currently is, right? When a film like that is what's going to be in your top 3, it tells you a couple things. One, the strength of that film, the strength of the love that people have for the older parts of the Star Wars franchise. Let's just say I highly doubt if they were to re-release The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, or Rise of Skywalker, it would get anywhere close to that same amount. just my overall guess there, but it also tells you how weak the other films actually are, whether it's the new release in The Fall Guy, which again did a lot better, but also very low as far as general overall opening weekends, especially domestically, are concerned. But even the weekend's second weekend numbers for films like Challengers and others are showing as well not to be able to hold up either. So Challengers dropping around 50%. So that's, again, a decent hold for a film like it, but still, because of how much the money that was spent on that film, it's not looking like it's going to make its money back, which for me, I think is a very good thing. At least it's not going to make it back at the box office. Maybe it'll make it back down the road. Obviously, Amazon, multi-billion, trillion-dollar corporation, and so that's going to be a huge factor, of course, in determining whether or not it's actually a loss for them or if it's just a, brush off the shoulder account. But still, happy to see that it's not doing as well there. But hey, 50% hold for a film like it is still percentage-wise pretty good, right? Making $29 million domestically at this point. A new film called Tarot, right? I'm assuming referring to the tarot cards, right? I think it's officially pronounced tarot. I don't really care because it's still dealing with witchcraft, really nonsense stuff that should be stayed away from, right? Basically messing around with the demonic, and I'm assuming that's the story that's going to be. It sounds like a very low-effort horror film from Sony in this instance, but hey, low effort only costing you $8 million means you don't have to make a whole lot of money to break even, so it's still cards on the table, all pun intended, for the film to make its money back, but let's just say, for a film with that title, I'm happy to see it not be doing better here. Godzilla x Kong dropping it now into the bottom of the top 5, 4.5 million, 38% hold there. We've talked about this before, that the film finally was able to hit its break-even point, just looking at the actual numbers as they were being reported. So it's just adding now to its profits, and I think it's still on pace to have a chance to get to $200 million domestic, which would definitely be a very good sign for that. And compared to the previous two films in the franchise, it's doing very, very well. Overall franchise, it's still looking to be maybe third place, and so it's still not quite getting anywhere close to the heights of the original film, the heights even of Kong Skull Island, but again, much better to be moving in this trajectory than where some other franchises have been moving, which is in a negative direction. Civil War from A24, 3.5 million, 48% drop after 4 weeks, so that film's still holding around, but again, the costs are definitely going to be holding that film back from, potential profits. Unsung Hero in its second week from Lionsgate. Again, a faith-based movie. From what I can gather, 61% drop seems pretty standard for these kinds of movies, which tend to have a much bigger opening weekend release. Kung Fu Panda 4 still hanging around after 9 weeks of release in the top 10. Abigail, third week dropping 56%. So most of the money has been really made for that movie at this point. And rounding out the top 10, we have Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which is not going to make its money back. We've talked about that when it's been a while. But yeah, that film, again, not really deserving to make its money back because it's not a good film. But hey, it is there, still in the top 10. The Fall Guy worldwide made $65.4 million. Episode 1, Phantom Menace, right? Technically on paper, it's made $1 billion when you think about how the film came out, again, a long time ago. But hey, it's in the top 3, so kudos to them. Challengers now at $52.2 million. So historically, according to the numbers charting, it's doing a little above average, I guess you could say, or at least towards the top end of average in its charting. But let's just say a film about tennis stars and Zendaya and the whole, again, just the fact that it's all about their sexual relationships and stuff. Like, again, it's just very disappointing. And also is very telling of what modern Hollywood has ultimately become. And I hope people just don't see it for that reason, just based off of the principle of the matter, right? All right, tarot card or tarot, whatever, I don't care. $10.2 million worldwide is for that movie. So again, with a small budget, the film has, gotten to the point where it's getting close to making its money back. I think it only needs to make about $15 million to make its money back. We'll talk about that more in a second. Godzilla x Kong, $546 million worldwide as of the recording of this video. Civil War, $78 million. Has a chance maybe to be able to stretch out to get closer to $90 million. $100 million would be a stretch at this point. But again, still a possibility. Unsung Hero at $13 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 at $520 million. Again, very impressive, but also not anywhere close to the original films in the franchise when you especially adjust those numbers and use like-for-like markets. Abigail, $34 million has pretty much made what's going to make. And Ghostbusters, $195 has a chance at $200 million worldwide, but that would still be well below where the other films in the franchise actually were. We love charts here over at OMB Reviews, and so let's go ahead and do some charting, and let me go ahead and also see if I can get the numbers to be a little bit bigger. Sometimes, for some reason, in this, it just, for some reason, have to click on that. That's why we like to do things live here, right? Keeps it more realistic. But The Fall Guy at $65.4 million, again, keeping in mind that most films can typically make about a third of their entire box office globally in their first weekend, but also remembering that some of those international numbers have already been cooked in from an earlier release, I believe. 65 million would mean ultimately maybe $180 to $200 million by the end of its run. For a film that needs to make at least $325 million, based on typical standards, probably has to be closer to $400 million, maybe, right? If you use some of the more modern standards. That's not going to be anywhere close to it. So Fall Guy, unfortunately, looks like it'll probably end up being a box office flop. Tenet does not have to make as much, like $20 million is actually its break-even point. And so at about $10.2 million, it's about halfway there. So we'll see where it goes. Based off of what I'm seeing, though, and some of the early reviews, especially from the critics community, it doesn't seem like it's a very good film. But because it costs so little, it might be able to actually make its money back. We can now make some projections on two films, including challengers. So at $52 million after 2 weeks, I'm projecting, based off of most historical standards, that it'll end somewhere between $74 million and $104 million by the end of its run, meaning because of its $55 million budget, it'll probably still end up losing money, around $37 to $19 million, on average losing around 28, so closer to $30 million. And so happy to see the film likely end in the red, but at the same time, the fact that it's making, really anything at the box office and that people are going to see it, and these are just the kind of movies that Hollywood's making, definitely makes me quite sad. So far, it's made 1 times its budget, just to give you an idea of that metric. Unsung Heroes is actually, because of a small cost as well, right, similar to what we saw with the horror films, is actually right now on pace to make its money back and to make some profit. After 2 weeks at $13 million, projecting the film to end somewhere between $18 and $26 million. If it holds out like most films tend to. At a $6 million budget, though, that means it only needs to make around $15 million to break even. So I'm projecting net profits of between $2.2 million and $6.7 million. Currently at $13 million means that it's around $1.1 million in the red. So I think it's definitely going to be making its money back very, very soon. And that would be definitely a good thing for a film like that. Ministry of Ungodly Warfare is still a flop, and can't say I'm that surprised by that. Again, this is very typical for the kinds of movies that you have had released from the likes of Guy Ritchie. And I think that some of the controversy surrounding the actor who plays a role in that movie, right, Alan Richardson or whatever his name is, probably hasn't helped, probably has kept some people back. But again, these are about what we expect for the kind of movie anyway. I've already talked about why blaming that for the reason why this film is failing is a bit disingenuous, because the film would have been failing anyway because of just how much money it had put in and how very little people tend to actually see a lot of Guy Ritchie's films more recently. Abigail is at $34.7 million. It costs more than what it probably should have, $28 million. And so right now that film is in the flop category. Not looking like it's going to break out of that at this point. Civil War at $27 million in the red. As you can see, right now it is performing about as well as most films do, right? It hasn't doubled what it's made in the first 2 weeks, but it is getting close to that on average report, right? Most films making about 60% of their entire box office in their first 2 weeks. And so we'll see just how much further it can get, but probably not going to make its money back. Could get close. First Omen, also costing a bit more, right? $30 million, only making around $50 million. This film right now in the red, and probably will stay there based on what we have in front of us with the numbers, right? Monkey Man was able to make a little bit of profit. Godzilla x Kong, as we've talked about before, these profits are not nearly as high because of how the splits work internationally, and we've done that in our random crazy charting method. And then we did talk about this earlier about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at $195, still around $32 million in the red. And when you take into account how much less they get back internationally, this film is definitely closer to somewhere between $50 and $100 million in the red, and it'll probably still end up there by the end of its run. But those are the numbers currently as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, make sure to check out my article that I write every single week for geeksandgamers.com, where I also have my box office breakdown in written form. So this will give you an opportunity if you want to be able to read it and not have to worry about listening to me talk for an X amount of time. It's going to be in a much more succinct fashion. I'm also going to have a special section on there going into some of these recent numbers, given my Tony over at Deadline, where he's trying to say that films like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 made money. And not just made money last year, but was one of the highest grossing profitable movies of last year. And we'll explain why his metrics are just so off. And let's just say it has a lot to do with Disney counting as money they paid themselves to stream it on their own streaming service as somehow being profits. And Tony goes into that. And so we'll break that down. Check out, again, that article should be out either later tonight or tomorrow over at geeksandgamers.com. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. We still have the shout outs for April because things are crazy here, getting close to the end of the school year. So I just want to thank everyone who has been continuing to support the channel, been putting up with all of just the delays in special extra content. I am still working on trying to get a podcast episode out. And again, I do apologize that those have not been as consistent, but I definitely do appreciate the support. It continues to allow me to do the work that I do here on the channel. And I know it has not been as much recently, but it really does mean a lot for the people who do support. So you guys are amazing, beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Easter, because we are still indeed in the season of Easter. Right now, we are on the 5th Sunday after Easter, getting close to the ascension of our Lord this Thursday, and also ultimately getting close to Pentecost as well. So a blessed Sunday, and as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my April Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with those members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel as Eagle Rider, and Miss Mountain Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my Subscribe Star members, we have Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and ZK-Man, check out his channel xtheboundaries.ceo. That's where you can find his website and his other social media platforms. And also a huge shout out to my one YouTube Chosen of Valhalla member, Mr. Roy. Always awesome. Every single member of my Chosen is amazing. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream video or listed, access to a podcast, access also to a giveaways channel that I host over on my Discord server, or any of these other things that are offered, check out the top link in the video description below and become a member today. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Easter. And as always, God bless.